One was at the age of 12. I was in my dormitory at school when a sixth former walked in with Anna Karenina in his hand. And the only thing that attracted me to it was red with gold on the book. And I said, "Is that a good book?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Why are you reading?" And he said, "Because I'm trying to get into the Oxford to do English," which he did. And I was quite naive, so I said, "Is that a good university?" He said, "Yeah." So I said, "Can I borrow that book?" And he said, "Yeah." So that was one. The second one was Anthony Beevor's Stalingrad, because it's so heavy that when you finally put it down, you feel 20 years younger. And it really is a tale of something. And the third book, and the only decent-sized book I've ever read in one day, was Practical Neurology by Brian Moore. That was sensational. And neurology is full of geeks. And most of them, or there was a joke that if you saw a neurologist, the only point was they would tell you where you are. They couldn't help you in any way. This book suggested that actually they could help you. And this was incredible and really set the scene for my career as a neurologist. So my talk today is perhaps surprisingly practical. And it comes from thinking about the 80 to 100,000 people that I have looked after personally as patients. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit today, in a rather short speech, but with a couple of practical points about physical education, the brain, and creativity. So we'll start the story in St Ninian's Primary School in Stirling, Scotland. And some of you might have seen in the newspapers a year ago that Elaine Wiley, the head teacher, started to randomly ring a bell, and all the students had to down tools and go on a 1 mile run. If they couldn't run, they had to walk. And what she observed was surprising. The biggest surprise to me is that the children enjoyed it. The second thing is, as you would expect, their physical fitness improved. But what really did surprise me is that their concentration and their cognition improved. If we take that story a little further, there was a 20-year period study of 1.9 million Swedish school children, and looking at the results of their exit exams at the age of 18. So that would be like the equivalent to our A-levels. And the results in their exit exams, when looked at as a huge population, was that the results correlated with how intelligent they were, as estimated by their IQ, which is no surprise. But what it did also show is that the results correlated with the cumulative amount of exercise that they had done as students during their school year. That result suggests that it's not a question of being sporty or a scholar, or scholar or sporty, but the two might have a symbiotic relationship. And the question is, what is that relationship? Subsequently, what we call in medicine randomized trials of the effects of exercise and learning showed that if you broke students up into 3 groups, one group just learned something, another group exercised, then learned the same thing, or a group learnt and then exercised, that the retention of the material was better, significantly better, in either of the exercise groups. So if you exercised, you actually remembered more about what you had learned, irrespective of the subject. It was slightly better, somewhat surprisingly to me, if you exercised after and before, but not much. But both exercise groups were significantly better than not exercising. Experimental studies have gone on to show that exercise promotes memory retention and improves learning by releasing a chemical which we call BDNF, but actually its full name is brain-derived neural brackets, and that's precisely what it does. It helps the neurons grow, and that when that's released. Data also shows that it's important that the person is happy doing a particular exercise to get the cognitive benefits. As stress, so not feeling happy when you're doing it, inhibits the release of the hormone. So, for example, dancing or walking the dog is a very good form of exercise, as is participating in mainstream sports, providing that you enjoy it. Tradition has clearly incorporated physical education into academic institutions. For example, there's a strong sports curriculum at Wellingborough and other private schools. The playing fields here are a rare phenomenon these days compared to many in the past. The Oxford and Cambridge boat race and varsity and collegiate matches show that tradition has somehow put exercise into the hearts of the universities. And of course, the American University Collegiate Sports Programs show that as well. All of which suggests that academic institutions appreciate the importance of exercise to their students. And as G.K. Chesterton once put it, tradition is the democracy of the brain. However, the importance of exercise in the brain is not only confined to young students, it's profoundly important to keep exercise through middle and old age. For example, exercising through middle age reduces the risk of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's by 50%, and even partially ameliorates these conditions if one has the misfortune to be afflicted by either or both in your later life. Consequently, the physical education curriculum and the resources to support it at Wellingborough are a tremendously positive force for your child's cognitive development, particularly memory, and thus academic performance, and not only their physical abilities. And I think you'll hear that story grow and grow in the future as a really important part of it. If we move just for a moment now to the brain and creativity, an American study was quoted in the Times last September when they looked at creativity in children between the ages of 3 and 5. And obviously there are different ways of looking at creativity that we could discuss. But they felt that 98% of the children they looked at were creative. They followed the same cohort for over 20 years. And they looked at them again at the age of 25. The creativity had fallen to 2% of them. That's a 96% cut in creativity as a result, or in spite of education, or perhaps through growing up. This is what 4 Nobel laureates said about the creative mindset. I can't force inspiration. Ideas come when I am not seeking, but that doesn't mean you don't have to prepare the ground to have the answer to the question. If I concentrate on finding the answer, it never comes. You might think about that, just remembering a name. When you're doing something, you can't get the name. I guarantee 10 minutes later, you're walking up the stairs and it pops out. The moment you take more concentration off. If I let my mind wander, the idea pops out like magic. So we then have these apocryphal stories. We have Newton laying under the apple tree. The apple falls. He's not at his desk, and he realizes gravity. Archimedes is getting into his bath, and he thinks, density. And Barnes Wallace was watching a kid skipping stones across a lake, and realizes the potential for a bouncing ball in the second. So there's a great suggestion that creativity comes when you're not focused. You may not know that the brain has a salient network which is like a light switch. And it switches one's attention back and forth from being focused on what we're doing to being relaxed in a daydreaming type of state. In the latter, the person is often just staring into space. And it may well happen to you several times, even during this talk. Conventionally, this is criticised in the classroom and also criticised in the sports arena, where if a football player or player in sport appears to be taking a bit of a time out, very often the fans get on their back. But actually, interestingly, if you look at the teams that these people play for, almost invariably, that is the creative play. Intriguingly, when the brain focuses its attention, the creative brain areas are largely turned on. Advanced activation brain scans have shown that in the relaxed, daydreaming state, specific areas of the brain, for example, the parietal lobes, which are where you have visions and visual associations, and the posterior cingulate joints, are highly active. And people in this daydreaming state report uncensored floating visual images. They're daydreaming. Hence the quote from the Nobel laureate, if I concentrate on finding the answer, it never comes, because the creative areas of the brain are shut down, they're switched off. Consequently, it's important to encourage your own creative thought processes that you give, in order to encourage that you give yourself time and space to switch off and to allow yourself to daydream. My favourite way of doing it, personally, is doing the dishes. Because I stare through at the garden, I'm not reading, and my mind is not. In this regard, Wellingborough created the sacred space as a resource to facilitate the creative and spiritual development. A decision